Let's do a quick roundup of what's happening in Missouri politics. First, let's address the major event on everyone's mind, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Just kidding. The world is basically on fire. Get that out of here. It's time for everyone's favorite game. Who funds your representative?
Jiggle, jiggle. I'd like to see you. Wiggle, wiggle. Jiggle, jiggle. I'd like to see you. Wiggle, wiggle. My money don't jiggle, jiggle. It folds. I like to see you wiggle, wiggle. For sure. It makes me want to dribble, dribble. You know, riding in my Fiat. You really have to see it. 6'2" in a compact. No slack. But luckily the seats go back. I got a knack to relax in my mind. Sipping some red wine. I think that went really well, don't you? I enjoyed it. Nice being in the booth. So, unless you have anything else, that's a wrap. Jiggle, jiggle. I'd like to see you. Wiggle, wiggle. Jiggle, jiggle. I'd like to see you. Wiggle, wiggle.
The Attorney General is the top legal officer of the state. Basically, they're supposed to be the people's lawyer. In Missouri, our Attorney General, Eric Schmitt, has decided that means suing anyone and everyone he can to bolster his chances in his Senate run.
I couldn't even tell you how many correspondents from, around the state from people saying, is it normal that the Attorney General is suing all these local school districts?
He removed $500,000 from the Attorney General's budget for next year. And his reasoning is because he's tired of the lawsuits against schools. Last year, the Attorney General, who's running for U.S. Senate, sued more than 45 school districts for COVID mitigations.
I think $500,000 is probably not enough, but it's something that obviously needed to be done.
His Republican colleagues unsure of how it will play out.
Would I say that schools handled everything just right? Absolutely not. Would I say that probably the Attorney General went a little out of his way for political purposes? Yeah, probably.
Most of those lawsuits that were filed by Schmitt last year have been dismissed.
All on the taxpayer dime. Now, with all this focus on politically advantageous lawsuits, many have criticized Schmitt for losing sight of the cases that actually matter. For example, he won't sue to close the Agape boarding school, a Christian boarding school where kids have been abused for years. 5 currently charged with abuse are still working there. Or how about the recent revelation the Southern Baptist Convention, the second largest Christian denomination in the U.S., stonewalled and denigrated survivors of clergy sex abuse over 2 decades while seeking to protect their own reputation. 8 ministers from Missouri are on this list. Investigation? Lawsuit? Not yet. Now we have news about Kanakuk Christian Camps in Branson, Missouri, where a victims advocacy group has compiled a list of over 100 victims of child sexual abuse by 30 perpetrators working for or at the camp. It's also becoming clear that at best this was ignored and at worst it may have been covered up. Have we seen the AG talking to reporters about his extensive investigation and lawsuits that he's filed? Not yet. I'd really like to see the people's lawyer here in Missouri spend just a little less time getting his name in the headlines through politically motivated lawsuits and a little more time, and this is a technical term, on lawyering for victims. A recent report showed nearly 1,800 kids went missing in the Missouri foster system between 2018 and 2020. That is 4% of all of the kids in the Missouri foster care system during that time.
Top DSS officials, including Acting Director Jennifer Tidball, responded to frustrated lawmakers Tuesday, days after the federal report was released, placing blame on previous administration.
I don't want to leave it with the committee that we aren't doing anything, because we are.
In the 59 cases reviewed by DHHS, the report says Missouri rarely demonstrated attempts to reduce children's risk of falling out of the system. The audit shows that in nearly half of those cases, there was no evidence that the child's case manager reported them missing, as required by state and federal law.
Your testimony is that this was a previous administration's big oopsie in violation of federal law. And I'm trying to determine whether or not, when we decided that that was a problem.
According to the report, one child became a victim of sex trafficking in 4 states.
We need to abide by state and federal law because, for one, we might not get funding if this goes on and more kids are sex trafficked out of foster care.
Those outside of the agency say problems within are well known.
HB 1559 passed unanimously in the House, which aims to address the issue of this massive amount of missing kids. But the Senate Didn't even bring it up for a vote, because the party in power that cares so deeply for children needed to focus on far-right senators who wanted more gerrymandering, holding the chamber hostage, or prioritizing votes on restricting voter registration and photo ID, and reducing funding for long-term housing for the homeless. You know, the important stuff. Now, I don't expect the determined group of legislators in the House will give this up, but if you want to see HB 1559 prioritized in the next session, you might want to call or write the leader of the Missouri Senate. After all, they do work for us. This past week, the worst school shooting in recent history happened in Texas. Here's a quick sample of how Missouri political leaders reacted.
Same as it ever was. 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 Same as it ever was.
So many say, don't bring politics into this. And while I think personally that that's just an attempt to create cover so the folks that don't actually want anything to change can avoid being questioned, on this Missouri rep's response, I agree.
I'm Vicki Hartzler, and I approve this message.
A pro-gun Second Amendment mailer just 2 days after the Uvalde shooting. To a certain degree, I guess you have to respect the cynical political opportunism. Good God. She said, screw the thoughts and prayers. Let's get to the fun part, where I tell you they're coming for all your guns, and you give me all of your money. Must be nice to feel so confident that the voters in your district will vote for you, even if you unapologetically try to build a bed made of money on the back of a school shooting. Too harsh? How about this? She's stoking fear among gun fans that this tragedy may lead to any regulation on gun rights, which will be a slippery slope to a socialist utopia where all guns have been taken and you are forced to hug a Democrat simply to leave your house. All for a few bucks. Let's talk about what the Missouri GOP, who has been in power for nearly 20 years, has done on guns here in my state. Well, back in 2007, the state repealed legislation that required background checks when purchasing handguns. In 2016, the General Assembly reversed another law allowing open carry, meaning permits aren't required. And the few places where guns are still restricted, namely churches and public transit, already are targets for those restrictions to be removed. Missouri doesn't have a minimum age requirement for buying a firearm. After lawmakers repealed legislation back in 2016, anyone 19 and older can carry a concealed weapon without a permit, and no training is required. Also in Missouri, you can open carry a firearm at any age. Now, federal law has limits around minors possessing guns, and the age limit on handguns is 21 there. But in 2019, the Second Amendment Preservation Act was passed, and that says that police here aren't allowed to enforce any federal laws that the state doesn't approve. How are these laws working for us? Well, firearms are the number one cause of death for children and teens, but that's total U.S. So let's check specifically Missouri. Here, the rate of gun deaths increased 47% from 2010 to 2019, compared to 17% increased nationally. In Missouri, we rank 6th highest in rate of gun violence. So not great. So what do we do here? We can't be content with this, right? I mean, there must be something we can do, like, what haven't we tried yet? We've heard many different solutions on how to stop school shootings. The ones that don't address guns often center around increased security. Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, had doubled its school security spending since 2017. They had a fence, surveillance, officers on duty, and shooter drill trainings. All of it failed. There was an armed guard in Buffalo and Parkland as well. And even if you believe an increased school safety budget is the way to fix this issue, how are we doing here in Missouri? Well, good news. Your school safety budget was increased to $1 million for next year, out of a $43 billion budget. Shit, we just approved $500 million to give a tax credit to middle and higher income Missourians. Feels like we might be tightening the wrong belt. The other refrain we are hearing is police just need to step it up, and we need increased penalties.
And I think the time has come to say we're going to have zero tolerance for this. We're going to get tough on crime. We're going to get tough on perpetrators. And if you go to a school or you go anywhere and try to commit a crime of violence with a firearm, you should be looking at life in prison.
Well, and in this instance, in a lot of instances, the perpetrator is dead at the end of it. And I don't I think a lot of people would say that that has not been effective as a deterrent. And
as a former prosecutor, I thought Holly would know. The penalty for murder is already life in prison or death. What is he looking for here? Some kind of double death penalty? Maybe we should try something other than what we've already been doing in Missouri. I mean, 89% of Americans want background checks. We could start there. Seems like baseline stuff, you know? Don't sell guns to criminals and all. But some claim that's a slippery slope to confiscating all guns. Come on. This idea that a background check is going to equal taking your guns away is absurd. Surely we can responsibly own a gun as well as make sure they are not in the wrong hands. Speaking of which, maybe we could create a law where police could flag someone who owns a gun and a court could decide if they're too dangerous to do that. Like an 18-year-old who just bought 2 guns and is posting threats online about shooting people. Challenge their right to keep that gun until the court says they aren't a threat. Like a challenge flag in the NFL. You know, you could call it a red flag law. And please, don't at me here, but maybe some age limits. I mean, Missouri has no age requirements on guns, but maybe a machine designed to kill people could carry the same age limit as a beer. But kids could still steal their parents' guns, right? I know. But most responsible gun owners already use a gun safe, right? What if we just required people to have one of those? Like how we require parents to provide a safe environment for kids already in law. Just like add a gun safe to that. Because guns just lying around, that's not safe for kids. Or some training could be required. You know, like how you have to pass a test to prove you know how to drive a car before you take it out on the road. There are probably a lot more creative and effective ways to combat this issue, but these ones feel pretty common sense to me. But what do I know? I'm just some guy with a tie.